Hi, good evening. It's Ray from Pro Shaper, and we're doing the second TIG welding video, but it's actually the third because we did a teaser first. And I've got a sample here of 060 3003, and what I'm going to show tonight is I've been doing a lot of different experimentations over the weekend and a little bit today. I did about 15, 16 samples trying to get this nailed down, and everybody has their belief structures. Well, this works, that works, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. So you always should be questioning what you believe. And I think I mentioned before, I had a series of different welders, and when we were doing the last two videos, I was using my Miller Synchrowave. It's like a 1985 Synchrowave. Still works beautifully. No problem at all with it welding steel. It welds steel beautiful. But as I mentioned, during classes when I would do a demo with that, probably 7 times out of 10 I could get a really good aluminum weld with it, but inexplicably 3 times it would fail, and it's kind of embarrassing. So I didn't know what was wrong, and I've tried all different things. Then I bought these everlast welders, which are inverted welders as opposed to that Miller Synchrowave, which is an old copper coiled machine. And this was a new learning curve. They have pulse on them, and I got introduced to pulse, and I really liked the pulse. And because I'm always having classes, I wanted another everlast, so I bought 2. One I set up for steel, and one I set up for aluminum. And the aluminum I have the pulse on, and I also have the Helium Argon 50-50 mix. And on the other one, which is the newest one, I don't run the pulse on it, or yeah, sometimes I do, but it's set up for steel, and that's purely argon. So in all my experiments, I was finding that I was getting a bunch of failures, and I'll show them to you with the Miller. And I was trying all different things with the Miller, and we'll probably have another video showing those failures with the Miller later. But tonight what we're going to do is just the everlast, and I'm going to do I've got 2 everlasts. One I've had probably for about 2 years, and this one I've had for about 8 months or so. And I think I've noticed a slight difference. Maybe they upgraded the technology in that little bit of time. I don't know. This one seems to run a little bit nicer than the older one. The newer one runs a little nicer. It might be a false perception on my part. I can't tell you definitively. This one I've got set up with the pulse. This one with no pulse. So we're going to start out with no pulse, and we're going to weld this up. Now I don't have to show you the entire welding process. We'll show you a little bit, then we'll cut, and then we're going to show you the clean up a little bit, maybe not all of it, and then we'll cut, and then we'll go to the torture test. Well, the torture test is, I know on any piece of steel I weld, whether you gas weld it or TIG weld it or whatever, effectively you've made the metal one piece again. If you got 2 pieces of metal, you weld them together. Unless you're a really bad welder, that weld will be as 95% or so as strong as the parent metal. And you should have expectations the same with the aluminum, so that you've got 2 pieces of aluminum, you're joining them together. That joint should be at least 95% of the strength, maybe 100% of the strength of the parent side, the 2 pieces of metal. So that's what I'm shooting for. I don't want to see any failures at all. And we're going to weld this with this non-pulsar with argon, 60 amps, 3003 aluminum, 1100 rod. And I've got a big number 10 cup on here, and I'm going to tack it. And when I'll tack them, and the procedure I'll use will be pretty much the same, except I'll be tacking them the same, which will be a fusion tack. I might add rod if I have to. And what will happen on this one, it's because it's not pulse, I'm just gonna burn the rod right in. That means that as I get the flame going, the electric flame, the rod is going to be right there, and it's just going to melt it right in. And it's going to make a nice little bead, and then I will run the weld on the back side with no rod, go right across. It's relatively quick. The tacking process is a little slow. And then after, when I get to the pulse machine, I will stick the rod in intermittently like this, daubing it in. So I'll note the differences, or you'll see the differences. So first we're going to tack it up. Mark will show just a little bit of the tacking, and we don't have to see the whole thing. We're going to try to make the video, 45 minutes to an hour or so. And then we'll be doing the torture tests, and I'll do a review of all the samples that I have on a bench over on the other side of the shop here. So Mark has suggested I go over the settings on the everlast, and the everlast has a memory, so you can put the settings into memory. So I've got it set up right now in advanced square wave. I use that almost exclusively. I've tried the other ones, which are soft square and triangular. I can't definitively say that one's better than the other. It seems to me, my perception at this point seems to me the advanced square wave works the best. And that's number one on the choice there, so that's probably what they're suggesting by having it number one. And then I have the pedal control. It's got a foot pedal. It doesn't have a slider or anything. This has a on-off button, but it's not hooked up right now. And then I have the pulse off. And then this is the array of major settings. I got it set at 60 amps. It's 60 thousandths, 1 amp for each thousandths of thickness generally. I'm going to have the other everlast set the same way. And then I have the AC frequency set at 160. I believe that's what I got the other one at too. And then the AC balance I got at 30, which is towards the cleaning side. And then I have post-flow 2.1, pre-flow 0.4, and then we're back to the 160 high frequency. So there we are. So that's the settings, pretty much. So we put on a Optrail helmet. Can't say enough about these. These are awesome helmets. I do have the magnifier in there, and we're just going to do a little bit of tacking. I'm going to start out, I'm going to lock these two ends first because sometimes they open up a little bit, and I've got a little bit of shape in this panel. So here we go on the tacking. They had to add a little rod on that one. Mark, can you give me that brush? I might have said it before, the neat thing about these op-trail helmets is that what you see, it looks just like you have no helmet on at all. It just gives you the protection, but the image is not really heavily shaded with a dark gray or a black or a blue or something like that. It looks just like what you're looking at right there with no helmet on. The only thing I don't like about them is I have to set it here because that front is really not good for setting down on, and I set it on the side like that. So I got it all tacked up. Just going to give it a little. Now this is the way I really prefer to aluminum weld and steel weld, is adding rod, and you have to swallow the poison pill of yes, because you add rod you're going to have to grind a little bit. The grinding is not that significant a deal. You try to make a smaller bead if possible, but if a bigger bead happens, that's okay. It doesn't take too long to clean it up. So we're going to run the bead on the top here. We're not going to do that backside welding deal. We're just going to run the weld on the top with the rod, and then we're going to run the weld on the bottom with no rod. So it goes pretty quick. Here we go. And you'll watch, I'll just let the rod kind of melt right into the puddle. It's rocking a little bit, so I'm going to put a little weight on it here. That's better. Alright, that was full pedal, that's all 60 amps. You go full pedal, you got to move fast, and you can see the bead looks pretty nice. So now we're going to flip it over. We got some decent penetration. It's not a major drop through, so that's nice. And now we'll run that bead right here with no rod. So I'll have the rod in reserve if I blow a hole or something, but So there's the back side, and that looks really, really good. It's hot. Front side looks good. So we're going to put that aside now, and we'll fire up the other one, and we'll do the pulse now. Remember, that was with argon, straight argon. The pulse we're going to do now has 50-50 argon helium. We'll clamp this up. And I gotta unplug this welder and plug the other one in. Move the foot pedal. Move this. Okay, so now we're on the second panel. We're gonna do this one with the everlast with 60 amps with pulse. But first we're gonna just tack it, and I've actually come to like tacking without the pulse more than with the pulse. So the pulse works really good on tacking too, but I did, after so much experimentation, I started to actually like the non-pulse better tacking. So we'll catch the ends first here. It's really easy to do those fusion tacks. And like I said before, they don't really hold too much together, but it holds it together and level enough to weld, but there's no strength at all in it. Let's put a couple more here on the ends, and then we'll throw this into pulse mode. And the settings on this are going to be pretty much the same as the other machine, except we're going to be running the pulse, which is right here. Alright, so here we go. Now, what I like about the pulse is I believe it's easier for beginners to, once you adopt it and get proficient with it, it's easier because it's more forgiving. It's a slower pace. If you're running it, this is all full at 60 amps, it goes a lot slower. The other non-pulsing method, you have to really run it fast, otherwise you're going to blow a hole or reduce your amperage quite a bit to go slower. But there's a beautiful looking weld bead there, and away we go. So now I'm at 90 degrees this way with a slight angle back, might even be more than 70, might be 50 degrees or so. And when you're like that, the rod is actually in the flow of the argon too, so everything stays really nice and clean. Well, there's the top side. We're going to flip it over, and we got actually a little bit more drop through on this one. Now I have the option of pulsing the back or just running it. I think I'll just run it on this one, so shut the pulse off. So there's our backside all taken care of, and we'll let that cool down. Bring this one back over. and we'll observe it. It looks really nice, no cracks apparent, looks very, very good. So now we'll clean this up and we'll planish this out. So we'll move to the other side of the bench to do that. The reason why I don't like doing the total fusion welding is you often get undercuts, little divots here and there. So when you add rod, you pay the penalty of having to grind, but you get the benefit of not having those undercuts. So this did move a little bit. There's a little bit of plane difference here. I wasn't clamping it really good when I tacked it, but that shouldn't make any difference. This should squash right down. Aluminum does squash pretty nice. Steel is a bugger. If steel is off a little bit, it's very hard to get it back together again. I could put this in the power hammer and squash this all out really nice in a matter of minutes, but not everybody has a power hammer. The planishing hammer would have a tough time knocking these down. There are some English wheel guys that have a special crushing wheel. I don't have one right now. I'd love to build one. I haven't got to the point where I can allocate the time to try to build one. That would be a really focused, narrow little wheel, and you can make it powered with a hand crank or with electric motor, because if you try to push it through, it's going to be difficult, but if you have the hand crank on it, it'll go right through. So we're going to just knock these down a little bit, and because you know, everybody doesn't have a power hammer, we'll planish them out and lower them a bunch with just a dolly and the hammer here right at the bench. So we're going to knock off the high points first, then we're going to planish it out with the hammer. That was just a minute or so of grinding. Now we'll try flattening it, and then we won't flatten it totally. We'll flatten it a little bit and then grind again. And when we're all done, both the front side and the back side should be perfect. There'll be like one piece of metal. There'll be no divots, and it'll flow perfectly across there. So we'll take the dolly. I got a little bit higher crown on this side here, and squash this stuff down. Now, you see the nature of the beast here. This weld bead leaves a little ridge on the sides. On this one, this side has a little ridge where it's a little tall there. Now I could grind it, but watch what happens when I hammer this down. Just like clay, the metal just squashed in to the surrounding metal, and that ridge is now gone. Now, you can't always do this in a situation where you're welding a fender up or something together, because you might be overdeveloping it. There's a little bit of shrinking going on here, but you know, it'd probably be better to grind it a little bit more before you pounded it in that much, but you can do that. And if you do make a mistake and you overdevelop the spot along the weld seam, you can always heat it with the torch and then just shrink it right down. That's enough for that side. Now we'll go to this side. Alright, now we'll grind this a little and see what we got. Alright, so that's where that plane change was right here. It wasn't clamped up and tacked properly. So I might have to give it a little more force there to level that out. I switched to the low crown side now. Right. So that's roughed in pretty nicely. Yes, I left my helmet off, cardinal sin. So, we'll go over to the planishing hammer. Everybody should have a planishing hammer in their shop. You can make one up pretty inexpensive. It's great for doing the welds. It's great for doing detailed work. So we'll run it in the planishing hammer die, and then we'll do a final grind on it, and then we'll do the torture test. So there's the weld. It's looking pretty good. We're going to sand it a little bit more. We'll go back to the grinding station. So we're still on the 50 grit here. Now we got the hook and loop 80. So there you have it. It's looking really nice. Got all the heavy scratches out. We do a test right here, bending it over the edge of the bench, and right here you can see a little fracture starting right here and here. That's on the edge of the weld. I might not have got all the edge of the weld out, but that will break if we do the torture test on it. Yep, it's breaking now by bending it. So there's no sense in bringing it over. We do have a little failure right here. This is with the everlast, with no pulse, added the rod, no annealing. I've seen a lot of people that will, and I've tried it myself, and I think you get better results if you're not going to use the pulse to anneal it, and you might possibly not get that little fracture there. That fracture will not happen as a panel on your car. If that was on your car with no stress on it, it would never crack. It's never going to be a problem with the paint's going to crack later on or anything. It's only going to crack if it's severely stressed, like I just did it there. So that's argon, no pulse, with the everlast, 60 amps, no anneal. Now let's try the one with the pulse with the Helium Argon combo and see what kind of results we got. So here we are here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pound this up a little. It's sunk in a little. What happened is it went in like this a little bit, and I just want to get that so it's prouder on the top. There we go. And I put our 50 on, and we'll grind this one up. We'll hammer this one down. Now a lot of people have been requesting a little demo also with gas welding, and we're going to try that also. So we've got a lot more to show. More grinding. My helmet on. Now we got one little spot here that's got a little ridge here where the weld is, so I want to see if I can pound that out of it. Got to identify it, it's right there. Okay, right there. What that looks like. I just about fixed it. So look for any spots that have that little ridge right where the edge of the weld was. We'll see if we can fix those. And we don't want to grind all this bottom material off because we can cold forge that into there. Yeah, keep in mind, this isn't your best work when you're doing on-camera stuff and you're trying to work to a time budget and you're working like crazy. Alright, let's bring it over to the planishing hammer now. That looks pretty nice. A little bit of undercut right here still. A little bit there, a little bit here. A few spots. So there's our surface. Looks really nice. I don't feel any perceptible low spots or anything in here. It's probably ground a little bit on the back side here where it's a little thinner in the weld zone. Again, this was done in a hurried manner. So let's do the edge test right here and see how this one fares. No cracks present. This is with the argon and helium. So let's bring it over there and we'll hammer it and do the torture test over there and see if it passes that test. Now here we go with the torture test. Now this is to prove that we've actually welded the material together, that it's as strong as the parent metal. So I rest my case. That's helium argon and the pulse, which I have found personally to be the most foolproof method. Can you TIG weld with argon and get good results? Yes, I have myself many times. But for the average person that's new to the welding game and they're tossing in their head gas welding, TIG welding, well, I think that you'll find that TIG welding is a lot easier to learn than gas welding of aluminum. And on steel, there's no question TIG welding is far superior, and I'll prove that in another video on steel. But I've found that using the addition of that helium to the mix, 50-50 helium argon, and also the pulsar, makes it pretty foolproof. As you can watch when I did that, you don't have to be that rapid. You can just kind of motor along. If you have to reposition the rod because you're really not good at feeding the rod, you can just kind of back it off, stop, get your rod back to position, and away you go. Now I want to show you some of the samples that we did earlier. We'll come over to the table over here. Alright, this was the first sample we did, I think, in the teaser video. And it cracked, and everybody went, aha! And this was done with the helium argon mix. And as I pointed out then, it didn't crack on the weld. As you can see the welds right here. It cracked adjacent to the weld. And the issue was I didn't grind it properly, and I left just a hint of where the edge of the weld was on the back side. And that was a weak point. So after a couple days or so, you know, there's still a little bit left on that sample, I'll grind those spots down and I'll do the torture tests, and there it is, and it didn't break right there. So that's proof that my theory was correct, that it was those little undercuts on either side of the weld that really broke, because when you take aluminum, you take it all and you scratch it and you bend it, it'll break right on where you scratched it. So that was a fracture point, that a stress fracture point. So this wasn't a failure of the weld, it was a failure of my technique in grinding. And then I did the grinding properly on this little end over here, and it passed the test perfectly. There's no breakage there. So this whole table is all everlast examples of various ones, some with helium argon, and some of them I annealed and some of them I didn't. I didn't find any difference. I think you're getting a pretty good anneal with the helium argon. I think it just burns a lot hotter than just argon. Some with pulse and some with no pulse. But I was getting good results just about across the board. I did get one spot here where it just started to fracture. I might have left a little grind mark in there, but just about every one of the everlast with the helium and argon mix, they passed the test. This is all done with the miller with just the argon. Some of them I annealed, and you know, some of them, they look really good, just as good as these do, but you get situations like this. Now this was with no anneal and it fractured. Some of it's to the side of the weld, some of it's in the middle of the weld, and this one was annealed, and even it fractured. But these are passable welds as far as if you had them on a fender or a car body, there'd be no problem with them. Not everybody torture tests their welds to this degree, but I think it's a good way of understanding what's happening. And I think we have a situation now where technology has improved the welding game quite a bit, and I'd strongly suggest, if you're going to buy a TIG welder, to buy an inverter welder with pulse in it, and I think you're going to serve yourself a lot better by making that decision. This was the one that failed in video 2. It would be actually the series. This was a fusion weld with the miller with no rod, and this just cracked right away and broke right off. And this will be your example. A lot of times you're going to see the same type of thing if you try to do that no rod. I find that to be pretty constant. It's a hit or miss whether or not you're going to get a good weld there. I mean, it looked beautiful, but it just didn't have that full penetration or handshake, I call, solid weld. I hope that raises your understanding of TIG welding a little bit. You'll never even approach the perfection on the TIG welding techniques and everything. There's just so much to learn in TIG welding. Everybody has their little dislikes and likes, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to develop your own technique. Just like English wheeling or power hammering, everybody will have their own little style. What's important is when you say you weld aluminum sheet, you're getting that thorough 100% weld. And you should test yourself, make sure that your procedure that you're using is actually yielding that kind of result. Now we're going to compare these TIG welding results with gas welding, and that'll be coming on later on. But that's going to be a continuation of the TIG series. We're going to be doing a lot of things, but tomorrow hopefully we get back to the JAG aluminum bonnet, and we'll get another installment done on that. Well, it's Ray Chalene from Charlton, Mass. God bless.